This is the story of a long battle, a battle that could have happened in any country in the world because it deals with a powerful global industry that produces a highly addictive, harmful product. This is the story of a struggle that united public health specialists, civil society activists, journalists and politicians across the whole political spectrum in an unprecedented way. This is the story of Georgia's battle against tobacco. We're talking about one small but beautiful country at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, famous for its rich food and glorious traditions. Indeed, at traditional Georgian house parties, meals and gatherings, you can hear jaw-dropping choral singing and long toasts. But one toxic element has somehow become a key ingredient of these traditions throughout the years. That is tobacco.
Tobacco use was the norm. It was intrinsically woven into daily life. People smoked at any kind of event, both indoors and outdoors. Smoking was a fundamental social norm. One can even say it was not normal to be a non-smoker. Non-smokers felt out of place. It was impossible to find a smoke-free place, whether it was a restaurant, a hotel, cultural facilities, administrative premises, or even medical institutions.
People smoked everywhere. If truth be told, everyone was a smoker. Some were active while the rest were passive smokers. The cigarette was a fundamental part of all social interactions, and fighting against smoking was difficult.
Between 2000 and 2017, a third of all Georgia's population of 3.9 million was smoking. Georgian adult men had one of the highest prevalence of current tobacco smoking in the World Health Organization European region, 57%. Women too increasingly started smoking cigarettes and other related products. This hasn't gone without big consequences on people's health. About 11,400 Georgians die every year due to tobacco-related illnesses. In economic terms, too, the country loses about 2.4% of its GDP as a result of tobacco use.
Globally, the proportion of deaths caused by smoking varies between 8 and 14%. But in Georgia, the figure was roughly 22%. This means that with an overall annual mortality of 45 to 48,000, tobacco use causes the deaths of around 11,000 people.
While there were some governmental attempts to reduce tobacco use in 2003 and 2013, these did not go far. The first tobacco control law, adopted in 2003, which was later slightly strengthened, banned smoking in schools and hospitals, imposed partial restrictions of smoking in buildings, and banned advertisement on TV and radio. But not much changed, and tobacco use remained embedded in Georgian people's lives and social norms.
This first legislation was so weakened that it was practically impossible to enforce. This was courtesy of the tobacco industry, and frankly, each section of the legislation had its own price in the parliament at the time.
Mainly, the law remained quite weak because the tobacco industry interfered, influencing political decisions and promoting weak measures that are favorable to them.
Unfortunately, the tobacco industry had enormous influence. In fact, the government itself ran this business, so measures to restrict smoking were of no interest to them.
But in 2006, Georgia gained a new ally in the fight against tobacco by joining the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control.
In 2003, the World Health Organization adopted this convention. Georgia voted in favor. Then the official signing and accession to the convention took place. At the time, this convention gave us all the available knowledge on tobacco control and helped us to understand the actions that needed to be put in place to achieve real results.
Things started to truly change and gain momentum when the Alliance to Fight Against Tobacco was formed. Medics, activists, NGOs united and started an anti-tobacco campaign, raising awareness about the health impact of smoking and consuming tobacco products, and the ways in which the tobacco industry was fighting against any serious attempt to reduce tobacco use. The Alliance put pressure on politicians to pass stronger tobacco control measures.
We spent a lot of time pondering on our campaign and what our message should be. And we chose a slogan, "Don't blow smoke in my face." In our language, this doesn't just mean "don't smoke near me," but also "don't lie to me." We carried out an information campaign over a few years, but people still struggled to understand that those 11,000 people, our friends, our relatives, didn't die fighting a war or as a result of some cataclysm, but because they used tobacco or were exposed to secondhand smoke.
At the start of our active communication campaign, deliberate misinterpretations created a view that we were fighting against smokers, and this caused an aggressive backlash. But we've always emphasized then and now that we are not fighting against smokers. We are fighting against the tobacco industry, which is killing us all on purpose.
In 2016, one first MP took the fight against tobacco in her hands, Guguli Magradze.
I brought the legislation to Parliament all by myself. I took up this responsibility and decided to fight for it to the end, because this legislation is vital for our country and fundamental for society.
Magradze came with a revolutionary bill, banning smoking inside cafes, restaurants, bars and clubs, and increasing taxation on tobacco products.
We registered the bill on Monday at 2 p.m. and 4 to 5 hours later I started receiving calls on my personal phone with requests to talk. Maybe we could adjust the draft a little bit, make it less restrictive. Such legislation can damage the economy severely. People might lose their jobs. The advertising industry will suffer, and so on and so forth. There were all kinds of offers. But I never gave in and refused to change the basic principles of the bill.
Suddenly, the tobacco lobbyists became more aggressive. They showed their faces to the public. As a result of the restrictions, they argued, thousands of jobs would be lost and the cigarette black market would flourish.
Of course, they used also other mechanisms. They wanted to influence the decisions by putting pressures or advocating, lobbying with hospitality sector, with other sectors, somehow spreading the fear that tobacco control law is going to damage business. And we know tobacco control law does not damage the business. It's tobacco smoking that damages health and overall economy of a country.
Following the parliamentary elections that year, one doctor, Akaki Zoidze, became an MP and the head of the Health Commission in Parliament. He took a lead on the fight against tobacco. This time, he wasn't alone. He was joined by 5 other MPs with the political will to curb smoking in Georgia. Together, they drafted one of the strongest tobacco control bills in the region.
When you are a physician, you understand that tobacco control is one of the most important issues in public health. And if you want to have a long-lasting impact and maximize the number of human lives saved, you have to create a healthy and safe environment and protect young people from this damaging habit by making sure they never start using tobacco products. This is your only chance. I cannot imagine a more important reform to help us with these problems. We put together a briefing document for each individual MP, outlining very accessible and clear answers to the most frequently asked questions and myths. For example, we set out arguments such as tobacco control will not depose the government, and debunked myths like tobacco is not generating revenue for the country, it's actually generating loss. We presented actual numbers on how many people die as a result of tobacco use. We assumed that the administration of the parliament would distribute these reports to MPs. This is their duty after all, but unfortunately, they never did. So Akaki took the reports himself, brought them into the chamber, and personally handed over the documents to each MP. It wasn't easy, and we made a lot of efforts to persuade our colleagues. At the same time, representatives of the tobacco industry were convincing each and every one of our colleagues that this would be the end of the world. Domestic income from excise duties would suffer. The country would fall apart if people stopped smoking. They were providing all sorts of arguments that I call zombie arguments. Why zombie? Because these arguments are recycled from country to country. When a government debunks one of the arguments, it is successfully reanimated in another country at the beginning of its journey in tobacco control. As such, my colleagues and I had to work with almost every MP on an individual basis. And the parliament has realized the tobacco control law was necessary and its adoption was vital. Hence, the decision to adopt it was made.
The law passed with the votes of the ruling party, one opposition party, and at least one member of the other opposition parties on the 17th of May 2017. This was unprecedented. It was the only law to be voted by at least one member of every party in parliament.
I think this is a non-partisan matter, and this opinion was shared by almost all MPs. It is the reform of the century and is beyond ideological disagreements.
The legislation was adopted with an outstanding 85 votes in favor and 1 against. This was a great opportunity for Georgian democracy. Transparent procedures and high-standard discourse made that possible.
It was a next-generation tobacco control law. It completely banned smoking in indoor public spaces, with a few exceptions, such as prisons, casinos, and cigar bars with a very strict special license. It banned most forms of advertising, promotion, and sponsorship of tobacco products, as well as tobacco accessories and devices. The pictorial health warnings became compulsory on cigarette packs. Plain, non-branded packaging was imposed, and e-cigarettes and heated tobacco products were regulated in the same ways as traditional cigarettes.
I came to Georgia in April 2019. At that time, the tobacco control law in Georgia was already passed in parliament, was developed, passed, and was under implementation. The first thing I saw, and it was on the way from airport to the city, you don't see any advertising of tobacco products. So this was already striking. But then when I reached Tbilisi, I saw what was striking was high level of compliance. You go and you see in public spaces, in restaurants, in bar, people are not smoking at all. And this was really surprising, because it's very important. You can have a very strong law, but it's important how strong the compliance with the law is.
The law had immediate effects. Between 2016 and 2020, the number of smokers in Georgia fell from 31% to 28%. In only 3 years, the country had about 100,000 fewer smokers as a result.
It is much harder to quit when you already use tobacco. In reality, all these laws were designed to prevent young people and teenagers from picking up smoking, and thus replacing people who die prematurely, on average 15 years earlier, from a smoking-related illness.
According to monitoring results, more than 96% of enterprises complied with the smoke-free environment rules. Surveys have shown that 95% of Georgians are aware of the regulations, and 85% of them support them.
Indeed, the legislation produced an effect. Within a year or two, the number of tobacco users was reduced by 1 to 2%. There was a reduction in the number of hospital admissions of people with acute strokes and heart attacks. This is considered a primary indicator in the fight against tobacco. People became united for a good cause, and we managed to reduce the rate of tobacco use by about 2%. And this was the start of a new trend. Not only was the number of smokers reduced, but we also saw a reduction in the average rate of tobacco use at individual level.
The greatest achievement of this legislation is that we became witness to a major shift in the social behavior of our citizens. However, awareness of this fact is still incomplete.
The main lesson learned during and after the law has been endorsed in Georgia was that it's possible. It's possible even in middle-income country with very limited resources, despite very strong opposition of tobacco industry. It's possible, it's doable, and people benefit from it.
Also, one warning from the tobacco lobbyist proved to be false. Rather than affecting the hospitality, food, advertising and retail industries, these industries kept growing. And the air quality in restaurants, bars, hotels and clubs much improved. Georgian traditions have stayed in place, but this time without tobacco.
Of course, it's not that everything is so nice and everything is perfect. We know that tobacco industry is not sleeping. Tobacco industry is always there, and it's always trying to use any single opportunity to weaken this legislation or to find the places where the legislation is not perfect or to discredit the legislation, and we have witnessed this.
Still, this is a story of change. The story of how even a small country like Georgia can win against a big industry if they unite.
I can boast about and be proud of the support of those people who made this possible. This was an uphill battle, in the true sense of the word, and it still is to the current day. Unfortunately, there are a few people who truly comprehend the meaning of this fight, and a lot of people are opposed to common sense and public health.
But the story is not over. The Anti-Tobacco Alliance has set ambitious goals for themselves.
Georgia can achieve the so-called endgame, which for us comes in the form of a reduction of tobacco use to 5% or less. Of course, we expect that our projects and initiatives, which we are developing together with the Ministry of Health, the Center for Disease Control, and the World Health Organization, will meet resistance. But we will keep on fighting. Saving even one life gives meaning to our lives. And so, the fight goes on.
The fight goes on, and only being united we can stand against tobacco.